Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Coming up on the program, Governor J.B. Pritzker unveils his budget proposal. More details on the Cubs' marquee sports network. Pursuing a more equitable food system for all parts of Chicago. And meet a salvage specialist trying to save Chicago's architectural history. But first tonight, former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich is home in Chicago after President Trump commuted his prison sentence just yesterday. He threw a homecoming press conference that was as much a media spectacle as one might imagine. Paris Schutz was there for the spectacle this morning. Paris, what was it like?
A spectacle, Brandis. You know, Blagojevich seems not to have changed a bit. When he was governor, he was often late to his press conferences, and thus was the case today, about a half an hour late for the planned 11 a.m. press conference. His wife, Patty, said it was because he could not find the socks that she laid out for him this morning. So he flew home, arrived in Chicago in the wee hours of the morning. He said he's still getting used to everything, including shaving with a nice razor. Thus, he nicked himself and bled on his chin, and he had to dab it throughout the press conference. And if anyone anticipated a more subdued and contrite Blagojevich after serving 8 years for his 17-count corruption conviction, well, they would be disappointed.
A long exile, a freed political prisoner. I want to say again to the people of Illinois who twice elected me governor, I didn't let you down. I would have let you down if I gave in to this.
Referring to himself as a freed political prisoner, Brandis, the governor spoke for about 20 minutes. He did not take questions, and he made sure to express his praise for the person who ultimately made the decision to free him, and that is President Trump.
Express our most profound and everlasting gratitude to President Trump. How do you properly thank someone who's given you back the freedom that was stolen from you? He didn't have to do this. He's a Republican president. I was a Democratic governor. And doing this does nothing to help his politics. President Trump is a man who is tough and outspoken, but he also has a kind heart. And this is an act of kindness, and I also believe it's the beginning of the process to actually turn an injustice into a justice.
And Blagojevich now refers to himself as a Trumpocrat, says if he does have his voting rights restored, then he will vote for President Trump.
Paris, did we get any insights into his time in prison, what he learned, what it was like?
Well, he says it certainly wasn't a country club, as some might have surmised. There was barbed wire fencing. He says it was patrolled by guards armed with machine guns. It was cold, dark, drab, and he says the vast majority of his fellow inmates were not white collar.
Drug dealers, cartel members, gangbangers, bank robbers. There were men there who committed murder, con artists, a lot of sex offenders. About 2% of the population were in the so-called white-collar category. For most of my time there, my home was a 6 foot by 8 foot prison cell with 4 cement walls, a big, heavy iron door that can shut you in, a small window with bars on it, and a bunk bed. I slept on the top bunk. Often late at night, I would look through that window and past those bars, out into the night sky, and I think of home. I think of my children. I think of Patty.
And Blagojevich used a lot of this press conference to talk about how the experience motivated him to fight for criminal justice reform going forward, that he saw firsthand what he feels are the inequities of the system.
Way too many nonviolent offenders are given way longer prison sentences than violent offenders and sex offenders who've actually caused great physical and emotional harm to their victims. It is a broken criminal justice system, and it has been for a long time. And it's a racist criminal justice system. But there's hope. And one of the great ironies of history is that so far up till now, in the history of our country, no one has done more or is currently working to do more to fix this broken and racist criminal justice system than President Trump and Jared Kushner. That's right.
And though Blagojevich casts himself as a victim of the criminal justice system, the prosecutors from his case yesterday wanted to remind everyone, well, the prosecutors from his case 8 years ago, yesterday they wanted to remind everybody about the very costly and real level of corruption that the governor engaged in. Quote, Mr. Blagojevich's convictions were reviewed by independent judges, including the Supreme Court of the United States. These courts affirmed Mr. Blagojevich's conviction and sentence, and the appellate court described the evidence against him as, quote, overwhelming. Extortion by a public official is a very serious crime. His prosecution serves as proof that elected officials who betray those they are elected to serve will be held to account. Now, Blagojevich expressed the most gratitude today at the fact that he was reunited with his two daughters and his wife. Nothing has changed here. This is just like the scene from 8 years ago when he held all those press conferences before leaving for prison, shaking the hands of supporters. There were a lot of supporters out there giving him signs and flowers and well wishes. And now later in our Spotlight Politics, we're going to have a little more on the mystery man that Blago credits for being the person that orchestrated this whole commutation process. And you can watch the full press conference on our website, news.wttw.com.
All right, Paris, thank you. More to come. We'll see you in a little bit.
Yep.
And we're back with Carol Maureen and more reaction to the Blagojevich story, so stick around.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Rod Blagojevich is either the face of political corruption in Illinois, or he is, as he has described himself, a freed political prisoner. Here to share their thoughts about the former governor, his conviction, and the president's commutation of his sentence are Lauren Caseberg. She is an attorney on Blagojevich's defense team for both of his trials as well as his appeal. Attorney Michael Ettinger, who has served as counsel to Robert Blagojevich, the former governor's brother and campaign fundraiser, who was charged with extortion and conspiracy to commit bribery. Connie Mixon, she's an associate professor of political science, the director of urban studies at Elmhurst College, and from Springfield, State Representative Jim Durkin, the Illinois House Minority Leader, and also the ranking GOP member of the Illinois House Impeachment Committee during Blagojevich's 2009 removal from office. Welcome all of you to Chicago Tonight. Lauren, today we heard the former governor declare himself battered, bloodied, bruised, and a former political prisoner. You know, he saw George Ryan be investigated by the feds and go to prison. He knows how this works. Is he really a victim?
I mean, I think, from day one when these charges were brought, Rod has always maintained that he never had any criminal intent. And what we've always believed truly and have argued to the judge and argued really to the public was that, this was a case about intent. And where is the line in politics? It's a case about campaign contributions. They never ever alleged a single dollar to his pocket, no personal actual gain. So this has been a case about politics the whole time. I think in his mind and in his heart of hearts, he does see himself in that light as a political prisoner.
Jim Durkin, in Springfield, you were there to lead the impeachment. Is there any grounds for Rod Blagojevich to argue that he was in any way victimized?
No, not at all. Rod Blagojevich is the face of public corruption in Illinois. He will continue to be that. He is a convicted felon, and he was convicted rightfully so, as per the appellate court in the United States Supreme Court. I'm not sympathetic towards his cause. He made his bed. He extorted Children's Memorial Hospital. He extorted a racetrack owner. Those convictions were upheld. He needs to understand that there are consequences to using your office for political gain,
to Lauren
personal gain.
Caseberg's argument, he didn't get any money out of it.
Well, you know what? These are questions of fact of whether or not he crossed a legal line under the federal code. And a jury has determined that he did, an appellate court has determined that he has, and the Supreme Court has indicated that he has as well. So I understand the defense attorney's argument, but the fact is we are a nation of laws, and it's up to the prosecutor to present evidence. If the evidence was not sufficient, we have a system of checks and balances in place within our judicial system to reverse if there is a wrong.
Michael Ettinger, your client, Robert Blagojevich, is different than his brother. He was a political neophyte. He came in for just 4 months to help his brother fundraise, by all estimates in his own book. He thought his brother sometimes went too far on these wiretaps in talking to people. Is Rod Blagojevich a victim?
Is Robert?
Rod.
Rod? In a certain way. I mean, I leave it to Lauren, but it's politics. Now, did he cross the line with certain phone calls? That's up to the jury. But he never took a dime. Never. And Children's Memorial is the alleged victim. They're a charitable organization. Well, they're not. They have a political wing with millions of dollars. They run fundraisers. I know at the first trial, the CEO testified. He had a fundraiser at for a local alderman at his house. So, and they had contributed to Rod before. So.
You're not buying it?
No.
So, Connie, your take on this victim or villain scenario?
Well, I think you can argue about the length of the sentence, and I would buy into a little bit of that argument, but I still believe that there was a violation of the public trust. And just because every other politician engages in pay to play, that doesn't make it okay. It's not okay because everybody else does it. And I think that this is especially important in a state like Illinois, where we're consistently ranked amongst the top 3 states in terms of corruption. And ironically, yesterday, my colleagues at UIC came out with a report that got buried in all of the news about Chicago being the most corrupt state.
So,
or Chicago being the most corrupt city, sorry.
And Illinois being the 3rd most corrupt state, right? Dick Simpson's study. So, Lauren, take us to the House. What was going on in the House today?
Yeah, and I want to talk about the House. I do want to quickly say, you know, it's difficult in this case because it is, you know, the public view and the public trust. And to be honest, you know, Leader Durkin saying, you know, he extorted a children's hospital, and those facts are just not true. This case from the very outset was framed by Pat Fitzgerald in a press conference that was given, and there's these one-liners. It's actually not true. That whole issue is about Medicaid reimbursements. It really doesn't have anything to do with Children's Hospital. It has to do with the CEO and the fundraising, as Michael mentioned.
But it was one of multiple scenarios in that trial.
But in all of those, it's Rod Blagojevich as a political person in a system that arguably, I think many people could say, is a broken system, and the line has always been fuzzy. And Rod truly did believe he was going very close, aggressively fundraising, but right to that line.
Let me go back to Leader Durkin then. Jim Durkin, you hear what Lauren Caseberg says. Your response?
You know what? I'll continue to say that Rod Blagojevich is an unrepentant criminal. He is someone who continues to play the victim, even as of last night and today. At some point, he needs to apologize to the people of the state of Illinois, not only what he did with his corrupt practices, but what also he did to the finances of the state of Illinois. With respect to Children's Memorial Hospital, that whole scenario, that fact situation, he was found guilty, and it was upheld by the higher courts. So we can call it the Children's Memorial Shakedown, or was it that a Medicaid reimbursement would only be increased if there was a significant contribution made from the CEO of Children's Memorial Hospital? To me, it's pretty clear.
So let's switch gears here a second. You were in the House today. I saw you out going in and coming out. Will you paint the picture of that, please?
Yeah, I mean, it was a truly joyous moment. I was so excited to see Rod in person and be able to give him a big hug. And truly the best part was seeing Rod and Patty and Amy and Annie all with smiles on their faces.
You hadn't seen him in 8 years.
I saw him once in prison very early on when he first went into prison. So it's been about 6.5 or 7 years, I guess 7 years since I've seen him in person. And it was just really nice. I mean, the family truly love each other. This is a strong family unit. Having known people, as Michael does, who've gone to prison for lengthy terms like this, families don't always stick together. They don't always support each other. They spread apart. It's hard. It's really hard to have your dad or your husband in prison. And they are a remarkable family. Patty's an incredibly strong mother and wife, and it was really wonderful to be in that environment and see them reunited.
Speaking of family sticking together or not, Michael, Rod and his brother Robert do not speak and have not spoken since the trial more than 8 years ago. Can you help us understand that?
We don't understand it. Robert has written Rod. He has gone to see him. He called Patty and asked to be on the visitors list. He flew all the way to Colorado and found out in Colorado he was not on the visitors list and was not let into the institution. Robert has sent him money. He wrote a letter to President Trump for him. He doesn't know why Rod has not spoken to him.
And Robert, on the phone to me yesterday, said he hopes someday they'll be reunited. But for the time being, is Robert going to keep calling, or is he not?
No, he's not going to call him again. He hopes Rod calls him, but no.
Connie, Rod Blagojevich's sentence you referred to as being maybe too stiff, and yet it was somewhere in the middle of the federal guidelines. It could have gone up higher. I think we all...
It could have gone up significantly higher, but when we look at Governor George Ryan, who had 6.5 years, to put that in context, and with Governor Ryan, people actually died. But I think it's important to know that
in the sale of commercial truck licenses.
Yes. But I think it's important to think about the fact that there's lots of mothers and fathers that are in jail and their families are separated who don't necessarily have the same clout or the ability to appear on Fox News to make a direct plea to the president to be able to have your husband released early.
Jim Durkin, you are a Republican, a faithful Republican, and yet you do not agree with this commutation. Rod Blagojevich today called himself a Trumpster and is going to do everything he can to help President Trump get reelected. Are you less enthusiastic about Donald Trump's reelection at this moment?
You know what, my focus is on the Illinois House of Representatives, but let me just say this, that I hope people notice that we've had a long-standing problem with public corruption in the state of Illinois. And we're going through a very, very significant investigation with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI for practices in Springfield and Chicago. When the governor says that, you know what, you don't have to pay your debt to society and that you really weren't that corrupt and can commute your sentence, I think it sends a terrible message to people in Illinois about what we've had to endure under this governor and other governors, and particularly when they're not going to do their time and pay their debt to society.
It puts Republicans in a bit of a bind, doesn't it?
It's awkward. It is definitely awkward. I disagree with the president's decision, and I know, but for Rod Blagojevich's celebrity, we wouldn't be in this situation. There are people probably in the Bureau of Prison who are more deserving of relief from the president than this particular individual, Mr. Blagojevich.
Lauren, in watching Rod Blagojevich today, it seemed sometimes like he was auditioning for a new job, either a commentator or maybe a member of the Trump administration or a participant on Fox News. What is he going to be doing?
You know, the Rod I saw today was actually sort of the Rod that I know. You know, I mean, I think that's who he is. When he is in front of a crowd of people and when he's in front of the cameras, he lights up. And so to me, I didn't see it as auditioning. I saw it as sort of, it's Rod. He's still the same and he's back in that way, in that affable, likable way. And so, you know, I think in his future, I'm really hopeful that he'll do really good things in the future. I think that this whole case, you know, should be shedding light on money in politics. I mean, I think for, you know...
There's also a federal investigation doing the same thing right now.
Right, but I think, you know, for politicians today, you know, no disrespect to Leader Durkin, but it's easy to take a pot shot at Rod Blagojevich. He's an easy target right now. If you want to get to the bottom of this issue, you deal with money in politics. Do you think that people are donating to all these other elected officials for the just because they want to, and it's just they expect nothing and no favor? You know, I mean, you know, yes.
Michael Ettinger, do you have a prediction on what Rod Blagojevich is going to do next?
No, I assume write a book.
But we'll wait and see. And Connie, do you have a prediction? Do you have a thought?
I don't. I think that he probably will end up in media somewhere, and I expect a book as well.
Leader Durkin, last word. We have a prediction?
I think he needs to spend some time with his family and really think about the acts that he has participated in, and think long and hard about what he's going to do for the future. But I think showing his mug on TV and going through this victory lap is not exactly something that I feel positive for the state nor for his family.
Jim Durkin, Lauren Caseberg, Michael Ettinger, Connie Mixon, thank you very much for being with us on Chicago Tonight. There's more ahead, so stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/Daily Briefing and sign up.
As former Governor Blagojevich grabbed the spotlight in Chicago, current Governor J.B. Pritzker today unveiled his budget proposal.
After years of poor fiscal management, of past leaders lying about how we got here, of scapegoating the wrong people and problems, our constituents deserve some honesty. No amount of wishful thinking will wave away our structural deficit or our pension obligations. No amount of lip service will balance the budget or fund our schools or improve public safety.
So how does Pritzker propose balancing the budget and funding schools and other priorities? Amanda Vinicky is in Springfield with a recap. Amanda, what did we hear today?
In recent years, it's become something of a political sport to characterize and present Illinois' fiscal issues as insurmountable. At least that's what the governor says, but he says he was here today to say that they are not. He's presented a $42 billion budget that he says is balanced. But of course, it's not quite that simple. That spending plan bakes in $1.4 billion that is contingent on voters in November approving that graduated income tax constitutional amendment. Now, should that pass, wealthy Illinois residents would see their income tax rates rise. Under Pritzker's plan, only then would universities, community colleges, elementary and high schools see their full promised increases.
I take seriously my constitutional duty to offer a balanced budget that lives within our means as a state, whatever may transpire. To address the uncertainty in our revenues, this budget responsibly holds roughly $1.4 billion in reserve until we know the outcome in November.
The governor's got a difficult job, particularly within his party. He's got to placate a lot of people in the Democratic Party who want to spend a lot of money on a lot of programs. He outlined a budget we think is short-sighted in that it relies on tax rate increases that the voters have not yet approved.
Republicans say that government agencies need to make cuts. They say that combined with Illinois getting some natural money, some natural revenue growth, means that the state is going to have all that is needed for a balanced budget that funds top priorities. They also say that while Governor Pritzker likes to continually blame his predecessor, Republican Governor Bruce Rauner, for holding hostage the state budget, social service providers and schools until lawmakers agreed with his pro-business, anti-labor agenda, that now Governor Pritzker is doing the same, albeit a scaled-back version, by holding hostage, again, social service providers and education groups to passage of the graduated income tax. Now, it's not just the GOP with that type of criticism. Head of the education group Advance Illinois, Robin Staines, called the governor's two-tiered contingency plan deeply disappointing and a significant blow. Child care centers, schools, colleges, universities need both adequate funding and predictability throughout the academic year to provide for the diverse needs of students across the state. They cannot build budgets based on hopes and assumptions, she said.
And Amanda, one of the long-term strains on Illinois' budget is, of course, pensions. What's the governor proposing for those?
Illinois is going to have to spend an extra $500 million in this next fiscal year, sending that to the state's retirement systems. That is at least 20% of the state's general revenue funds. Now, Pritzker's spending plan makes the full pension payment in either of these budget scenarios, but should voters approve the graduated income tax constitutional amendment, pension funds would get even more money. Also, for the first time in years, Illinois would be putting money in versus taking money out of a rainy day fund.
These are all the things that the government reform groups and that the rating agencies have been looking for to see from the state of Illinois to show that we're back on a path to long-term structural success.
Republicans say that they're disappointed that otherwise Governor Pritzker didn't address the pension issue, didn't talk about how he could reduce those costs. Governor Pritzker is a very close ally of public employee unions, and he made clear where he stands.
The fantasy of a constitutional amendment to cut retirees' benefits is just that, a fantasy. The idea that all of this can be fixed with a single silver bullet ignores the protracted legal battle that will ultimately run headlong into the Contracts Clause of the U.S. Constitution.
So, Amanda, the governor's laid out his vision. What's next?
A whole lot of negotiations between both parties, also between legislators. Granted, Democrats generally like what they heard from the governor and Pritzker's office. Also, Brandis, a whole lot of campaign commercials revolving around this constitutional amendment as Pritzker and his allies strive to make the case that Illinois needs to move from a flat tax to what they say is a fair one. And then as the GOP and business groups fight back against what they say is basically giving politicians a blank check. Do also want to add that outside of this progressive income tax that Pritzker is pitching, there are no new taxes, no increased fees in this budget. It does, however, bank on $46 million paid for by marijuana users when they buy cannabis at legal licensed dispensaries here in Illinois.
All right, Amanda, thank you. Now to some more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. It's official. The city of Chicago is under a climate emergency, but what exactly that means still isn't clear. The city council passed the measure today, calling on the city to initiate a climate mobilization to reverse global warming and the ecological crisis. 47th Ward Alderman Matt Martin says shoring up the lakefront is only one way to respond to climate change impacts, but he also recommends steps to encourage electric vehicles, improving the city's tree canopy, and the city's waste management practices. There's more of this story on our website. Though the Illinois primary is still more than 3 weeks away, voters in Chicago could start casting their ballots as early as today. The Chicago Board of Elections opened its Loop Super site at Clark and Lake this morning. It also introduced these new touchscreens and ballot scanners that'll be used in early voting and on Election Day. On March 2nd, early voting opens at sites in all 50 wards and more than 50 locations in suburban Cook County. Election Day is March 17th. For more on early voting and the primary, visit our website. That's where you'll find the voter guide to the primary election. And you can hear from candidates in their own words on why they want your vote. That's at WTTW.com/voter guide. New logo, new stadium, new broadcast partner. The season of transformation continues for the Chicago Fire Football Club. Today it announced that WGN-TV will be the place for fans to watch games. Of the club's 34 regular season matches, just 10 will air on national broadcasts. All others will be carried by WGN. The regular season schedule begins with the Fire at Seattle Sounders on March 1st. The first game, both at the Fire's new home, Soldier Field, and on the team's new station, will be April 4th. As for the weather, a chance of flurries tonight, otherwise cloudy with a low around 10 and wind chill values as low as 2 below. Then sunny tomorrow with a high near 22. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, more details on the Cubs' marquee sports network. There it is. Pursuing a more just food system for all parts of Chicago. Meet the salvage specialist who saves architectural treasures left over from the earliest days of Chicago. And who is the mystery man that Rod Blagojevich credits with convincing President Trump to let him out of prison? Answers to that and more in this week's Spotlight Politics. But first, some of today's top business headlines from Crain's. Here's Stephanie Goldberg.
Thanks, Brandis. Boeing is inspecting more than 400 stored 737 MAX jets after discovering tools, rags, and other debris left in the fuel tanks of newly built planes. Bloomberg reports that the checks are not likely to create a new delay for the MAX, which could be cleared to fly by mid-year. Chicago-based Boeing has been working with regulators to recertify the jet and end a grounding that began almost a year ago after 2 fatal crashes. Meanwhile, following disappointing fourth quarter results, Groupon stock was down today. The company badly missed revenue targets, reporting sales of $612 million. That's $93 million less than expected. Now CEO Rich Williams says Groupon is dumping its goods e-commerce merchandise business to focus on the local experiences market, which continues to migrate online. The goods business, which launched in 2012, offered discount mattresses, electronics, and more. Finally, Deerfield-based food company Mondelez is teaming up with streetwear brand Supreme to launch a double-stuffed red Oreo. Known for its high prices and collaborations, Supreme unveiled the cookie among its spring-summer line this week. 3 packs of the new Oreos, complete with the Supreme logo, will be sold for $8 each. For Crain's Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Stephanie Goldberg. Back to you, Brandis.
A red Oreo. Thanks, Stephanie. And now to Paris Schutz with another Crain's business reporter on a big story in the sports media world. Paris.
Brandis, the days of watching the Cubs on free TV are long gone. The Cubs' new marquee sports network will be exclusively on select platforms like DirecTV and Hulu. However, the biggest player in Chicago's broadcast field, Comcast, is not on that list. The possibility of having to get a new cable provider has left fans unhappy, so unhappy that at this year's Cubs convention, they gave Cubs chairman Tom Ricketts quite an earful.
The Marquee Network. What do you have against the Marquee Network?
Seems genuinely surprised there. Joining us to hear more about the network is Danny Ecker, a reporter with Crain's Chicago Business. Danny, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
All right, remind our viewers, what is Marquee Network?
So Marquee Network is the new channel that the Cubs are launching this weekend, in fact, is when it hits the air. This is something that was several years in the making. The Cubs have talked for years now about wanting to break away from the regional sports network of NBC Sports Chicago, which they've had for the past 15 years, with the Bulls and Blackhawks and White Sox on one channel, and form their own network. The idea being that there is an insatiable demand for Cubs content, and they believe economically they can do better with their own channel, and that's what's launching this weekend.
Might be an insatiable demand, and yet the initial reaction there, boos. Why do you think that is?
Well, a number of reasons. I mean, one, Cubs fans are very passionate, and it hasn't been the best 2 seasons, which is remarkable when you think about how we're not that far removed from a World Series championship.
The bar has gone up a little
bit.
Yeah,
for Tom Ricketts to get booed already, but when you think about that backdrop of some of the on-field frustration with the fact that the Ricketts family, the owners of the Cubs, have spent a decade really monetizing the franchise and Wrigley Field in so many different ways. Ticket prices have gone up, and that's what you would expect them to do for their venture. But there's a bit of maybe sticker shock fatigue, and now you're adding in an element of people who are used to watching maybe sometimes in free TV, or at least on part of their cable package, watching the Cubs, and now they're going to have to pay more if they want to see him. Even if they don't want to see him, they're going to likely have to pay more if their cable provider picks up this network and carries it. So it's just a matter of saying, well, all right, this is not a good time to be charging people more to watch us.
And yet the largest cable provider here, Comcast, still is not carrying the network. What is behind this dispute?
Well, there are always these sort of staring contests, right, between a live sports entity and a cable carrier. This is a staring contest, and it's all about leverage on either side. The Cubs are basically saying, all right, we've got all these deals with other smaller providers like RCN and AT&T and Universal DirecTV and even Hulu, now they announced this week. They've got everyone surrounded saying, hey, Comcast, you're not going to be the one to be missed out, right? You want to show the Cubs games this season. I don't think your customers are going to be too happy. And by the way, you're losing a lot of these customers to cord cutting if you don't show the Cubs. So here's our offer. Here's what it's going to cost to carry our network. And you should probably play ball with us. And on the other side, you have Comcast saying, hey, by the way, Cubs, how would you feel if almost half of your market couldn't see your games this year? What would that do to your brand? We feel like they have some leverage too. So it's just a sort of a game of chicken that it's going to see how it plays out. But it could be maybe Comcast doesn't carry the network for spring training, but maybe for opening day, or maybe even longer. And we'll see how it all shakes out.
Do you expect Marquee Network to be the moneymaker that the Cubs anticipate it will be?
I do think that the rights fees they're getting, this is a partnership that they've formed with Sinclair Broadcast Group to launch this network. I do think that it will probably be more lucrative for them in the long run than staying with NBC Sports Chicago, but it's probably not going to be as lucrative as they thought it would have been a few years ago when they really talked about this idea. We've now gone in, because of the length of the partnership they have with the other teams, we're now in this era of cord cutting and customers abandoning cable, and so there's still a premium for rights, for broadcast live sports, any rights fees when it comes to any of these teams, but it maybe wasn't as inflated as it was a few years ago when we saw teams like the Dodgers do their deal with Time Warner in LA. The Cubs probably just maybe missed the timing a little bit, but I think they're still going to do quite well.
So the Dodgers did that deal. The Yankees did a deal years ago for Yes Network. How have those two enterprises fared?
It's been lucrative. The Dodgers have made a lot of money, and that's why they've been able to spend a lot of money on players, or at least that's certainly has correlated those two. But you still have a large portion of LA that can't watch the Dodgers because the main carrier there didn't pick them up, and so you have that's a big problem. It could be a big problem for the Cubs if Comcast decides to say, we're going to sit here and we're not charging our customers anymore. They're already sick of it, and that's why they're cutting the cord. So that's kind of the Dodgers is this sort of representative case of saying, well, how much, what's it going to cost the team as far as branding and exposure and building future fans if they can't watch, their team in market? And it's kind of amazing when you think about the Cubs, which were on WGN America for so long, and that's why there are Cubs fans all over the country, and to so quickly go to the potential for having almost half of the Chicago market not being able to watch the Cubs would be quite a reversal.
Absolutely. I started watching the Cubs when I was a kid because we didn't have cable and the Cubs were just on TV.
That's right.
So we'll see how this shakes out. Danny Ecker, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And Brandis Friedman is back with more right after this.
There's truth to the adage, you are what you eat. Our diets and overall health are closely related. Many Chicagoans in underserved neighborhoods, particularly on the city's south and west sides, are not within walking distance of a grocery store, leaving them with fewer nutritional options and more vulnerable to diet-related diseases. This issue and many more related to food sustainability will be the focus of the 15th annual Chicago Food Policy Summit, an all-day free event at the South Shore Cultural Center this Friday. Joining us now is Roger Cooley. He's the executive director of the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, which is hosting Friday's event. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
So first, if you would, tell us briefly a little bit about your nonprofit and what is the Food Policy Summit that's happening on Friday?
Yeah, so we're, as you said, the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, and we focus on bringing together community partners and organizations who are looking at wanting to provide and create a new food system that provides a lot more benefits, or a more just food system that would help improve the health of folks, improve the sustainability, of the environmental sustainability of our food system, provide economic development opportunities for communities who have been cut out from different food opportunities through businesses, and then also how that then can connect to the health and well-being of kind of more vulnerable populations of children, elderly folks, while working in collaboration with city departments and agencies who touch food in many different ways, whether it's the zoning of where stores would be located, the economic development resources for corner stores that could sell healthier food, how land is going to be allocated for urban farms and gardens, but also even where's the water going to come from for making sure those crops get the water they need throughout the year. And also with public health and how to make sure folks are learning about where these opportunities are to get healthier food, but also make better choices.
You said a just food system. What is a just food system?
Yeah, so for us, it really does hit those different values. One, so that, as you know, there's a lot of coverage about the inequities in terms of how the lifespan within Chicago. You can go 5-10 miles, and it can be a 30-year gap, and a lot of that comes down to diet-related diseases, which then comes down to folks' access to healthy food, or also being able to participate and purchase that healthy food if it even is in their area. So there is trying to make that bridge between economic development opportunity and pathways for folks in all communities to be able to make an income living through food, but also then be able to have it and be able to sustain their lives while also nourishing in, the larger environment.
What are some of the hurdles? You touched on it a bit, but what are some of the hurdles that different communities in Chicago face?
Sure, some of it's been around, long-standing redlining, or rather, that would have caused folks to move, not be able to access and build community wealth. So when there are episodes like the latest recession, where in a lot of neighborhoods then folks get displaced because of foreclosures or being evicted from when they can't afford their rent anymore, then causes kind of a downward spiral in those communities. So, retailers are leaving, so they're not having access to daily food, the folks are not having access to jobs, and so they're becoming more dependent on other benefits to make, just barely ends meet. There's also, it's challenging for small businesses to navigate, especially folks who are immigrants, who maybe English isn't their first language and they don't have the same cultures and regulations that are here. Food business is a core way of they make employment, so it can be really challenging for them to pass through the different layers of bureaucracy and then getting access to the funds and resources to be able to start and emerge and grow their businesses.
So this is the 15th Annual Food Policy Summit. Can you point to some of the successes or outcomes over previous years?
Sure. Some things we've worked on in the past that have gotten passed was improved compost legislation that took place first at the state and then the city level to allow folks to compost in community gardens or even to do it commercially, so we could then have healthy soils for urban agriculture and farming. Looking at urban ag zoning, it was technically illegal to farm for profit in the city until the zoning was changed in 2011. And then our biggest one was in 2015, we worked on and got 40 organizations to sign off at the summit to help pass the Good Food Purchasing Program, which we then were able to pass with the city and county, which then set standards for the food that's purchased by or served at county and city agencies, which covers about $320 million a year in annual food budgets.
Has Mayor Lightfoot been receptive to your efforts thus far?
She has been, and actually at last year's summit, at the end of it, we had a mayor's forum for the candidates on food and environmental justice. And she came out very much in favor of a lot of our platform issues during the session. And so we've gotten nothing but continued support from her administration so far.
If you could grab a collective ear of the city council and maybe advocate for a top priority, what would those priorities be?
I think really leveraging the opportunities in the south and west sides for directing city resources in a really directed way and focused way, including Department of Planning for how land use is allocated for opportunities for getting folks on the land and vacant spaces, not just reserving it for potential development down the road. Really looking at how then departments can collaborate around economic development resources for getting job training, for getting folks connected to, the Invest Southwest is a great head start, but really looking at the barriers that folks who were starting with almost zero income or savings to be able to get the grants and loans they need to start becoming active business partners.
Okay, Roger Cooley, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you.
Again, the 15th Annual Chicago Food Policy Summit is taking place Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the South Shore Cultural Center. The event is free and open to the public, and you can learn more about it on our website. Chicagoans have long taken pride in the city's history and architecture. But as some areas are redeveloped, it's inevitable that some of that is lost. But one man is doing all he can to rescue treasures, large and small, from the earliest days of Chicago. His name is Jimmy Neuter, and Chicago Tonight viewers were first introduced to him by Jay Shefsky in a piece about one of Neuter's attic finds. Neuter is in the business of architectural salvage, but for him, it's more than just a business, it's what defines him.
My grandfather helped build some of these skyscrapers in Chicago, and growing up I just had an affinity and almost a history tour as a kid of what this was and when it was built, and you see it disappear and you kind of feel something.
He says that there are only a small number of people doing the kind of work he does.
Most of the people that are in the business that I'm in are in for the quick grab and the maximum money. And I will focus on something as small as a marble or as big as the Division Street Bridge.
Neuter originally intended to be an artist and studied painting and printmaking at the School of the Art Institute, as well as photography at Columbia College. But after a time working as a carpenter, his passion for architectural artifacts took over.
My eyes programmed to see things that are just a little bit different, fleeting things, things that are not common. What I'm really the most passionate about is the earliest of Chicago. The details were so much more opulent and whimsical and Gothic. That period of time, it was innovative. It was during the Industrial Revolution. Things were just being mass-produced, but not quite. This would be a small fragment. It was an old SRO that Al Capone's guys were using at the time during Prohibition. This is hand-fingered. You can see the clay was put in the mold, and those are hand finger marks in there. Small and insignificant, but it does have a provenance.
Nutter has also salvaged items of greater historical significance, including this from the now demolished Cedar Street studio, once used by Frank Lloyd Wright.
A lot of these things are kind of, they're math puzzles to solve. You have no idea how you're going to accomplish something. A lot of times you're in the moment, you're just kind of trying to figure things out, and as you go, I listen more with my ears than most people can see with their eyes. You know the strengths and weaknesses of a piece. You know how far you can push it or bend it or pry on it.
Among his most treasured finds is his dog Skeeter.
He was abandoned in the house for 11 days, boarded up before I got him. And that's right there is a prize find in the architectural salvage business. He's been a great companion.
But Nutter's business, American Vintage Reclamation, is now threatened by a dispute with his landlord, who acquired the warehouse he rents in 2019 and which could ultimately force him to vacate the space. The matter is now in the courts.
I have a 6-year lease. I'm fighting right now to keep that lease, and I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
And as he battles to preserve his business and Chicago's fast disappearing history, Nutter draws on the strength of his immigrant grandfather, Augie, who had to literally fight to keep his job as an iron worker.
You'd be up on the building, laying the girders, and every day after work, he'd come down and there'd be a group of people waiting to work the next day. So they'd target you if you were small and beat the tar out of you, put you out of commission. So he decided one day having lunch up on those girders that he was tired of getting in fights, and he decided to put his sandwich down, walk a handstand about 20 feet down that beam, turn upside down and hang from his toes, spread eagle, for about 15 seconds to let everybody see that this guy wasn't anybody to mess with and that he certainly wasn't scared of anything.
And Nutter says he has carried the spirit of his grandfather with him ever since a moment of fear he felt high up on a slippery roof.
I got to the realization that I'm in a really high, privileged perspective. This is a really beautiful place to be. The sun was just coming up, and I thought back for a second on what my grandfather had to endure being that iron worker and how much fear he had to overcome to do his job. And the calm set over me, and I realized I am that, and there's nothing for me to fear because I know my balance, I know where I came from, I'm privileged to be here, and from that point forward, he's been with me every day.
And you can find out more about Jimmy Nutter and his architectural salvage business on our website. Former Governor Rod Blagojevich is back in Chicago after President Trump commuted his sentence from 14 years to 8 years served. This comes as a new report still paints Chicago as the most corrupt city in the nation. We tackle this and more with our Spotlight political team of Paris Schutz, Carol Marine, and Amanda Vinicky from Springfield. What a couple of days, you guys. Paris, let's start with you. Blagojevich, he alluded this morning to a mystery man that may be the person responsible for his commutation. Who is this?
He called him the mystery man. His name is Mark A. Vargas. He said that if you need to get out of prison, this is what this guy does. He's someone we don't know much about. We didn't know much about beyond today. Here he is coming home with Blagojevich from Denver. So the first person Blagojevich sees after he steps out of prison after 8 years is that guy, Mark Vargas. He's from Chicago. He went to Judson University, an evangelical school in the suburbs. He says he has a close relationship with Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and top advisor. So he came on board, it seems, when this whole strategy of putting Patty on Fox News to flatter Trump and to talk about, shared grievances, and then to sort of have Rod Blagojevich frame his story in the broader context of criminal justice reform. And it appears that he was integral in that whole process.
Carol, are there deeper underlying reasons that Trump might have made this move?
There are lots of them because it kind of all comes together with the president's grievances and also the timing. Right now you have an embroiled Justice Department where 2,000 federal prosecutors or former prosecutors are saying that the Attorney General, Mr. Barr, should resign for tampering with or messing around with the wheels of justice. You have federal judges who want a meeting to talk about that. So this is a tricky time, and Roger Stone, the president's close advisor, dear friend, is going to be sentenced tomorrow, and the president believes that that sentence should not be a long one or even exist at all.
What do you make of the governor's comments today, calling himself a political prisoner and part of a corrupt criminal justice system?
I think it's classic Rod Blagojevich. He is aggrieved, as the president is. He feels he is persecuted, not prosecuted. You know, it's sort of messianic, but that is Rod Blagojevich. You know, he quotes Rudyard Kipling and Theodore Roosevelt and the Bible. He's sort of a savant, but he is also someone who lives in his own particular bubble.
Let's not forget, you know, the bombshell charges here in this conviction were trying to sell the Senate seat and shaking down then Children's Memorial Hospital, the racetrack. The stench of unethical behavior followed this administration from the very beginning. If you look at all these state boards that had people that sat on them, these positions were all up for sale. There were political fixers like Stuart Levine, Chris Kelly, Tony Rezko that were intimately involved with Governor Blagojevich, and by the way, Patty Blagojevich as well, in this scheme and raising big-time campaign contributions, selling seats on these boards.
And this was something that the governor's own father-in-law, Dick Mell, raised in the very beginning of Blagojevich's first term. In addition, if you listen to those audio tapes that the FBI made, Ron Blagojevich is constantly talking about money. Whether he got any or not, he talked about it, that I need to make money, Patty needs to make money, maybe I need to be in Obama's cabinet, maybe I need to
start a nonprofit.
It was a lot about money.
Amanda, I want to bring you in here. Are Republicans in Springfield, are they facing any blowback for publicly rebuking the president, President Trump, over the Blagojevich commutation?
I would say that the rebuke from Republican members of Illinois' delegation to Congress, they said they were disappointed in the action, but it wasn't overly harsh against President Trump. It was more harsh against Rod Blagojevich. I don't think that there is going to be any sort of big fallout between Trump and, again, the GOP members of Congress, those who've spoken out against him. We've heard from some on this show with Representatives Durkin, Senator Ryder. No, these are individuals who lived through the Blagojevich era in Springfield, as did many of their constituents. So Illinois is still lasting that fallout on the reputation nationally for being so incredibly corrupt on a level of, we're talking about the budget address today. Blagojevich skipped pension payments. We are all literally still paying for it. So no, I don't think that there are many members of the General Assembly that are taking flack, no matter what their party, for coming out against Blagojevich, against this decision from President Trump. And like I said, obviously we'll have the primary to see if voters are upset about that. And there may be some Trump backers, but not here.
Jim Durkin did acknowledge, though, in this interview tonight, that, yeah, it is awkward. And I think Dale Ryder did as well last Tuesday night.
He said, I am a Trump supporter, but I disagree with
But it's a little tricky.
It's a fine line to walk. I want to get back to this idea of the mystery man, Mark Vargas. It raises so many questions. Did the family pay this guy? Where did this guy come from? How did he get into the Blagojevich orbit? How is he in the Jared Kushner Trump orbit? Why did Jesse Jackson Jr. and Reverend Jesse Jackson get involved? They wrote a letter to President Trump, and the White House said, you know, part of their decision was based on the fact that African Americans were for this commutation of the sentence because of tough criminal justice sentencing.
And let's remember, Rod Blagojevich and Jesse Jackson Jr. did not get along and did not have high regard for each other, so something did change.
All right, we'll have to see what's next. My thanks to Amanda Vinicky in Springfield, Carol Marine, and Paris Schutz. I almost called it Carol Schutz and Carol Marine. Back to wrap things up right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7, one-on-one with Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
And 2 Chicago artists talk about their featured work in a new exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry.
Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.